feel in this assembly, the wonderful spirited singing that I have enjoyed with you. And a moment ago when we sung, I Believe in Jesus, I thought how appropriate today in the history of this land for God's people to sing loud and clear, I believe in Jesus. I believe in the words of the Bible. If my sermon today had been geared to the news events of the week, I would probably be preaching something about how health care and gay rights can be seen in the Confederate flag or something like that. It would have been about that confusing, I guess. But I'm not here to talk about that. We're here to worship God this morning and to pour out our hearts to Him in praise. And I think we could do nothing better at this hour than to do an exercise in self-examination, introspection, if you please, and just look at ourselves and ask some difficult questions. Thanks to Ray and Mike, Sue and I were able to see for the first time the play last night. And I don't think my life will ever be the same because I have a new appreciation today for my sight and my hearing. And it's very emotional for me, I confess to you. This morning when we prayed, I started my prayer. The first thing I said, I thank you, God, for my sight. And I just nearly lost it. We have so much to be thankful for. And we need to praise His name for every blessing we have. I had some definite things in mind that I might cover in this sermon. But I'll just tell you now that early in the week, Sue and I were talking about what I would preach today, and I'll give her credit for this. She said, you know, it would be a good time to talk about blindness and really the various aspects of it and some of the things that we need to think about when we think about people like Helen Keller. And so I sat down, or we sat down really, and started just listing some things. And that was enough to get started. And so this morning I want to talk about blindness. I thought, well, we need to talk about deafness as well, but it's already 7 minutes past, and so you can't cover everything in one time. And we'll just talk about blindness. There's all kinds of blindness, you know. There is obviously physical blindness that some people have to struggle with. Then there is moral blindness. Some people just can't see moral issues as God has defined them for us. And then there is spiritual blindness. Some people can't see God because they're just blind. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. You know, in this room right now, there are all kinds of sounds. And I'm not talking about little babies or the shuffling around that we sometimes do, or even the snoring. I know my sleepers now. I can spot you way back there. But there are all kinds of sounds in this room. You can't hear them right now because you don't have a receiver. But if you had a transistor radio in hand and turned it on, it would be, this room is full of music and talking, all kinds. But you have to have a receiver. And the reason some people are blind to God is they just don't open their eyes. The reason some people don't hear God is because they just don't have their receiver turned on. Our job is to keep our receivers tuned in to God's will. Then there is virtual blindness, where you remember the adage that we've all heard, I guess, all of our lives, which says, "None is so blind as he who will not see." And there are some people who just don't want to see. They've decided that they're not even going to look, and so they're blind. There is an interesting thing in the Old Testament book of 1 Samuel chapter 16 when Samuel was given the responsibility of going out and selecting the king to succeed David, or to succeed Saul. And God sent him to the house of Jesse. And when he went into town, it was a fearful thing. They thought he had come for war. He said, "No, I've come for peace. In fact, I've got a heifer here for the sacrifice. Join me in the sacrifice." And so at the house of Jesse, they did that. And you remember the story that here comes Eliab out. And he must have been good looking, must have been handsome, looked like a leader. You know, we select leaders sometimes by the way they appear. He makes a good appearance on television. But anyway, Eliab was like that, I suppose. And Samuel looked at him and he said to himself, and God heard him, he said to himself, "You know, surely the leader of Israel is standing right here before me." God said, "Oh no." He said, you close your eyes. Don't look at him like that, because God looks on the heart. Man looks on the outside. God looks on the heart. 1 Samuel 16 and verse 7 is where he says that. Oh me, when we look around us at little children, we need to be more like little children. In fact, Jesus said, you're not going to get into heaven unless you become like little children. So we need to be more like little children. Have you ever noticed little kids, the real little ones? They're in the nursery, or they're in the daycare or somewhere like that, and they all play together. Little bitty kids don't see black and white skin. They don't see the clothing and the things that we judge people by. They don't see that at all. And as they get just a little bit bigger, they're out on the playground, and they're not interested in what color you are. They just say, you know, would you be on my team? And things like that. God help us to be more like little children when we look around us. Little children, they don't see deformities, they don't see handicaps, and they don't see clothes and stuff like that. The question is, how can they get from there to where they arrive maybe in their teen years, when they don't even want to be seen with you unless your clothes have the right label on the shirt or on the shoes? What happens when they move from that to that? Well, they become blind to the things that really matter. And they start judging people by the way they look and what they wear, what they drive, and where they live, and how much money they make. You see, our problem is blindness, and it sets in very early in life. We become blind. Those of us who preach, I guess, are more aware than anybody that we preach different styles of sermons sometimes. Sometimes a sermon can be just a hot and heavy speech. At other times, sermons can be more like just an informal talk. I guess that's what I want to do this morning. I just want to talk for a little while. And it starts right back here behind me. I'm talking to myself, and I'm talking to you. And we need to ask some questions, and we need to think about some things that we need to see, and some things we don't need to see. Obviously, the first thing we need to see is God. But anyway, I want to talk about some other things first. The faults of other people. I'm just like you are, I suppose. I have often been too preoccupied with someone else's faults or shortcomings, and too little attention is given to my own. Sometimes we can be so cruel by just focusing on the faults and shortcomings of another person, so focused on that we cannot see the good in their life at all. The mistake that someone makes, the breakdown of his life at a certain point in his life, and we remember that. You know, you bring up the name of Simon Peter, and almost immediately we think about the denial. Or we bring up Thomas, and we all immediately we think about his doubt, and too little about the accomplishments of those men and their faith. You know, I don't want you to judge me by some mistake that I have made, or even by several mistakes that I've made, and you could find a number of them. I want you to judge me more by the direction of my life, not just of one thing that I have said that I wish I'd never said, or something that I did that I wish I had never done. Look at the direction of my life and encourage me and help me along the way. We see people from a material standpoint, or a carnal standpoint, if you will. Skinny people or fat people. I've been both, I guess. I've been fat more than I've been skinny. A whole lot more. 7 years ago, I weighed 315 pounds. Thank God I was able to conquer that. But when people see someone who is extremely heavy or extremely skinny, immediately they form opinions about them and fail to see the person. We don't need to see the outside nearly as badly as we need to see the inside. People of a certain size or who wear certain things are more likely to succeed in a materialistic society like ours than the common person. That's just a way of life, and it's sad. Another thing that I don't need to see, or things that I don't need to see, are things that tempt me to do wrong. And boy, do we ever have a plate full of that. It's a smorgasbord. It's a cafeteria of things that tempt us, of the movies that are available, and the magazines that are before us, and the television presentations that are given to us. There is just a lot of that I don't need to see. And very frankly, it's getting to where I just don't watch much television, except the news or sports, something like that, because there's so much there that eats away at one's faith and at your moral life. You kids, you young people sitting here who are still under the care of your parents, your dad and mom are not just whistling in the dark when they tell you that you should not go to that movie and you may not read that book or those magazines. They know what that will do to you. And to all of you, whether you are a young person or an older person, if you spend a lot of time listening to Howard Stern or Bill Maher or listening to the gangster rap, then don't come to me asking me what happened to my faith. Because those people and those things will eat away at your faith, and it will erode your moral and spiritual life. And so you don't need to see some of that. You don't even need to be curious about it. Another thing that we need to give some attention to as husbands and wives is this. I don't need to see the faults of my spouse or the shortcomings. I don't need to see that. I need to be blind to it. I need to look at some of those things that bother me, or that get you all uptight or tense. And I just need to stop sometimes and step back and say, does it matter? I mean, how the toothpaste is squeezed. Or how the toilet paper, is it over or under? By the way, it's supposed to be over. That's what Ann Lander said. But anyway, does it matter in the long run? Is it a life-changing thing? One wife said that her husband was so bad about leaving his dirty clothes. There was socks there and underwear there and dirty shirts over here in the floor. And she spent several years trying to reform him, and it didn't work. She said, I got a hammer and some tacks and I nailed him to the floor. Next time he tried to pick them up, there they were. She said, I finally got his attention. Another man and his wife had been married about a year, and some of her little faults and idiosyncrasies were kind of getting under his skin a little bit. And in one of those tender moments, they were just laying there talking about things, and he said, "Sweetheart, would it be okay if I just pointed out 2 or 3 little faults you have that just bug me to death?" And she said, "No, darling," she said, "you go right ahead, because it's those little flaws that kept me from marrying a better man." And that ended that. But we just need to, sometimes we just need to ask, does it matter? Is it worth upsetting my family? Is it worth hard feelings over these little things that really don't matter? A man came home one day. The house was normally just so nice and neat and clean and orderly and pretty. He came home from work one day, and the 2 little kids were just running wild. The house was a wreck. The dishes were in the sink. Dirty clothes were stacked in front of the washer. And he looked around and he said, "What happened?" She said, "Nothing happened. That's what I didn't do today." And we just don't always appreciate what goes on behind the scenes there. We don't appreciate it in the church, even. What would happen if somebody didn't do this or that or the other? We ate communion together a moment ago. Those cups didn't just fill themselves. Some servant of God, back behind the scenes, I don't know who prepared that for us today, but it was probably not one of the preachers or song leaders, maybe not even one of the elders or deacons. In many cases, it's some quiet person who never taught a class, who never led a song, never got up here and led a public prayer. But it's somebody with a servant heart who just saw that things got done. So we don't need to see the faults of people so much as we need to look behind the scenes and say, somebody did this. Somebody helped. Over in the 9th chapter of Acts, there is the story of Dorcas, or Tabitha. She died, and someone just all of a sudden blurted out, "Send for Simon, send for Peter." So they sent for Peter, and when he came, they had already cleansed her body and taken her upstairs, and I guess she lay in state there. And Peter comes in, and it says there, and this is such a tender passage, it says all the widows were gathered around her. She had made clothes and things like that for people. They had gathered around her, and they were talking about the things that she had made. Look at this, she made that, and she had started this, and she was going to make this for somebody else. And they were just talking like we do about a person like that. And it was Dorcas. I don't know anything else about Dorcas. All I know is that they were going to miss her badly when she was gone because of the things she did. And this church is filled with people like that. There are people in all of these pews sitting around us that we never hear very much from. And we don't know what they do, but if I were a betting person, I would bet that a great amount of the work that is done in this church is done by people who don't make very much noise. They just see that it's done, and we need to look around us and say, who would do this if it were not for that person? So instead of looking at the things that we don't need to see, let's look at the good things and help each other and encourage one another. Now, some things that we really need to see. The first thing, obviously, is God. We need to see God. You say, I can't see God. You can't see Him. You can't really hear Him, not with the physical senses. But the Bible says, Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And I don't think He's talking about just in eternity, when we see Him on His throne. No, I think we can see God every day. You have to be blind not to see God. Over there in Psalm 19 and verse, where is it? It's Psalm 19 and verse 1 beginning. It says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth His handiwork. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the world, and their words to the end of the world." He said, all of nature is talking to you all the time, and it's talking about God, and you need to listen to what nature is saying about its creator. You can see God. And sometimes you can see Him in some of the most unexpected places, some of the most surprising places. In the lives of people, in the life of a child, you can see God. Another thing we need to see is we need to see ahead. We need to look ahead and try to see what is out ahead of us, what is in the future. We need to see a young person and what they can become. Not just what they are now, but what they can become. We need to see a crying little baby, like the little child a moment ago screams out. And we need to see ahead in that person's life and think about what that person can become. A young family needs to see ahead. We lecture our young people that are nearing adulthood when they're thinking about marriage, and forming their own family, their own home, having their own house, car, so forth. And we tell them now, son or daughter, you need to look ahead, you need to plan ahead, do this and prepare for whatever may happen. Just make plans financially and otherwise. Plan ahead. See the future. Not just today, but see the future. I need to see that. And sometimes I don't see that. We need to look at our children and their response to our training and try to imagine what it will be like if we continue the present path. For instance, here's what I mean. A child of 3 or 4. I've seen this recently in a restaurant setting where a little boy, about 4 years old, struck his mother in the face in defiance. And she just kind of grins and brushes it off. There's no punishment. There is no reaction negatively on her part. Now, a little child, 2 or 3 years old, that strikes back, that may look cute at that point. But let me tell you, when he's 10 or 12 or 14, and he is defiant and rebellious against his parents, it won't be so cute then. And so when they're 2 years old, you need to see ahead and look at their behavior now and ask, if we continue on this same path, will it be good or bad? And do I need to make some in-flight adjustments here? We have parroted the phrase so often. We have said, seeing is believing. You know, sometimes that's used in advertising. Seeing is believing. And we know what that means. That if you see something that performs in a certain way, some product, well then you can trust it. Seeing is believing. Well, turning that around a little bit, believing is seeing. We ate the supper a few minutes ago, and we sang, I believe in Jesus. And he said that we are to discern his body, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, discern his body when we eat that bread, and discern his blood. In other words, see his body and see his blood. That's what we need to try to do when we hold that bread in our hand. Just stop for a few minutes and try to see, visualize Jesus. See him. And if we believe in Jesus, as we say we do, then we can see him. In our own minds, we can see Jesus. Another thing I need to do, I need to see opportunities to do good around me. I need to see those opportunities. It's not always easy, but they're everywhere. The need to help other people is everywhere present. From your own family, to your neighbors, to those who have been victims of a natural disaster in a faraway land. Opportunities to help and to serve. That's what Christians are. We're servants. We're like Jesus. We are servants. I like the idea of random acts of kindness. And a couple of years ago, my daughter Jennifer called me one day, or one evening really. She said, on the way to work this morning, I stopped at Starbucks and I was in the line in the drive-in. And she said, when I ordered and when I got ready to pay, the girl at the window said, yours has already been paid for by the person in front of you. She said, I had no idea who it was, but it was just a random act of kindness that somebody did. So she said, made me want to do the same thing, and I'm going to do that. There is a movie, Pay It Forward, about random acts of kindness and how that catches on. And you know, who better to start that than Christians? Instead of just talking about how bad things are, just start doing more and more good things and letting our light shine before men that they can see us. Become a servant. Did you know there is a difference between serving and becoming a servant? There is a big difference. And I'll tell you what it is. I've experienced it in my own life. I'm trying to recover from that, and you've experienced it too. They make an announcement from the pulpit that something needs to be done. It may be cleaning the yard, it may be painting here in the building, it may be a general cleanup day or whatever. Help is needed. And so you think about it for a minute and you say, well, I've got some other things planned for Saturday, but okay, I will do that. I'll give a Saturday to that. We've all done that. That's serving. But you chose to do it. You thought about all your other stuff, and then you said, okay, I'll do it. Now, if you are a servant, when you become a servant, you give up your choices. And when it needs to be done, you just do it. And then if it needs to be done again next Saturday, you do it. And you keep on doing these things because you're a servant now. You're not just doing service. You're not just saying, okay, I'll do that. When you say, okay, I'll do that, you're in charge. But when you become a servant, you're really not in charge. You have already decided that you are a servant, and you will do these things because of that. One of our greatest needs is to see the potential in other people. I suppose there are few people that realize this more than school teachers, public or private. It's so hard to imagine and to see the future of a child. And oftentimes, rather than put out the energy that's necessary, we just kind of let it go and neglect children. I want to share with you a true story, and you can read more about this if you want to just pull it up on the internet and read about him. It's a story about Theodore Stoddard. It was the first day of school, and Jean Thompson, who was the 5th grade teacher, said to the children, she said, boys and girls, I love all of you, I care about all of you, and blah, blah, blah. But we know that teachers don't always tell all of the truth, just like all of us. We don't tell all of the truth. Because there was a little boy in her class, Teddy Stoddard, and she didn't like Teddy from the very start. He slouched in his chair, and he didn't pay attention. He came to school all shabbily dressed, sometimes not clean, and occasionally with a bad odor. In every way, he was just thoroughly unattractive, and she just didn't like Teddy. But teachers keep records, and sometimes those records are passed on, and she had the records there. And she thumbed back through the records, and here's what she saw. 1st grade teacher. At the bottom of all of the reports, she said, Teddy is a good boy. He shows promise in his work. He's attentive, but he has a poor home life. All right? 2nd grade report. Said Teddy is a good boy. He does what he's told, but he seems too serious. His mother is very ill. 3rd grade. Teddy is falling behind in his work. He needs a lot of help. His mother died this year, and his father is showing no interest. 4th grade. Teddy is in deep water. He needs psychiatric help. He seems almost totally withdrawn. Okay, that's Teddy Stoddard. Christmas came. The kids all brought a present to teacher. They were all nicely wrapped with bows on them, gift cards. Teddy laid his on the table. It was wrapped with a brown paper bag, some Scotch tape on it, and her name was scribbled. It just said, "For Mrs. Thompson, from Teddy." She tore open the paper, and there was a rhinestone bracelet. It had 2 or 3 stones missing. And there was a small bottle of perfume. Over half of it was used. And the other kids started to giggle, and Miss Thompson had enough presence of mind that she put the bracelet on. Then she unscrewed the bottle of perfume and took a little of it and dabbed it on her neck. At the end of the day, all of the kids left the room except Teddy, and he lingered behind. He came over to Jean Thompson, and he said, "Miss Thompson, all day you've smelled just like my mom. And her bracelet looks really good on you." Jean Thompson said that when that boy left, I closed the door, got down on my knees, and cried and prayed, "God, help me to help this child." Next day, the kids all came, and she said she was a different teacher that day. That day, she said she taught with a heart, and she really cared for all those children, especially those who needed help, and particularly Teddy Stoddard. By the end of the year, he had caught up with everybody and had surpassed a lot of them. Well, time passed. Teddy goes on to school, and he's in a different school now. And she hadn't heard from him in a long time. But one day she got a note, and it said, "Dear Mrs. Thompson, I'm graduating from high school next week, and I just wanted you to be the first one to know." 4 years later, she got another note. And the note said, "University was really hard, but I enjoyed it. I liked it. Love, Teddy." 4 more years later, and another note said, "Dear Mrs. Thompson, I have now finished med school, and as of today, I am Dr. Theodore Stoddard, MD. How about that?" Then Mrs. Thompson kept reading, and it said, "Ms. Thompson, I want you to be the first to know that I'm going to be married in July. And I want you to come to my wedding and sit where my mother would sit. My father has died, and you're the only family I have. Love, Teddy." So she said she went and sat where his mother would have sat because she deserved to be there. I read that or stories like it, and it just makes me wilt inside with guilt feelings over the times I have overlooked the potential for the future of a child. I just need to take off my blinders and see. And I need to see so much the good in other people. There is so much good in the worst of us, and so much bad in the best of us, that it hardly behooves any of us to speak ill of the rest of us. And I need to see that. God made us in His image, and He made us with the capacity to care. And there are so many caring people out there. It's easy, especially during a week like we've had, to focus on the negative, but we need to focus on the good. The night before last, I picked up the phone again and dialed Peggy Stout up in Anchorage, Alaska. Several years ago, I don't know, 15 years ago maybe, I developed a friendship with her daughter, Dee Dee Johnroe. Dee Dee has been a sled dog racer in the Iditarod 7 times, finishing second twice. Last week, the awful fires that are raging in Alaska swept through and burned their 2-story log house out there, Dee Dee and Mike. Burned everything they had. She had 53 dogs there, and she got 52 of them out. So I called her mom, Peggy, night before last again, for the second time this week, and I said, "How's Dee Dee and Mike doing now?" She said, "Wonderful." She said, "They're going to start rebuilding next week," and she said, "Mr. Joins, I just can't believe how many good people there are who have come to their rescue." She said, "There's so many good people out there." And so I hung up the phone later and I thought, I need to think about that. There are all kinds of good people out there. And I need to focus on that and see the good in folks. Open my eyes, dear Lord. Just let me see. Let me see. The Civil War had taken such a toll on this country and had left people feeling so low. And one day toward the end of it, Julia Ward Howe is sitting there in a chair by the window at the old Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C. And she heard, the windows were up, of course, she heard the wagons coming and the clip-clop of the horses' hooves, bringing in the dead and the wounded. And it looked so dark to everybody. Nobody could see any good ahead. But Julia Ward Howe was an abolitionist. She could see what other people couldn't see. And so she sat down with pen in hand and wrote the words to the song. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Sing. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. Saul of Tarsus was blinded one day, struck blind by God. For 3 days he couldn't see a thing. And he probably thought, this is it. He may have thought, this is my due for the persecution I have visited upon the people of God. And he may have felt such guilt and sorrow over it all. What he didn't know that was God was working on his heart. 3 days later, God used his servant to bring back that sight. And when Saul took the blinders off and could see, oh my goodness, his life changed the history of this world. It started a movement, the kingdom of God on this earth, a movement that toppled Rome without firing a shot, and a movement that is strong enough to overcome foolish, godless decisions of any nation on this earth. Saul could now see. God help me to overcome my blindness and to see what I need to see and to close my eyes to the things that I don't need to see. Well, that's enough of this talking for today. If you have a spiritual need that you need to discuss with us, and if we can help you in the process of moving toward God to obedience to the gospel of Christ, and if you don't understand that, you just come and we'll talk about it. We'll open the Bible and study about it. Let's stand and Ray will lead us in song.
Have you a heart that's weary, standing a road of care? Are you a soul that's seeking rest from the burden you bear? Do you know my Jesus? Do you know my friend? Have you heard He loves you, and that He will abide till the end? Where is your heart, O pilgrim? What has your life revealed? Who knows your call for comfort when all the sorrow you feel? Do you know my Jesus? Do you know my friend? Have you heard He loves you, and that He will abide till the end? Who knows your disappointments? Who hears each time you cry? Who understands your heartache? Who dries the tears from